All right, Bob, should we go ahead and start?
Indeed.
Great. Well, I want to welcome everyone to our now our fifth session. Welcome to everyone for being part of this important work, Mindful Eating for the Beloved Community. As we reflect on our last sessions and the sessions that are up and coming, we still have some more conversations and contemplative conversations to get into. I'd like to open up with a very brief contemplative centering exercise. The reason for this is that we are all under different stresses of all different sorts, family, community, and we just want to, and I want to start with everyone just taking a couple of deep breaths and just breathe in your mouth very, very slowly and fill your lungs. And exhale through your nose or through your mouth, whatever you prefer. Some people say nose, some people say mouth, but the exercise is just really taking in this air and just really trying to calm the mind and really filling the lungs so you can almost feel it in where your navel is, and just breathe in and try to hold it for 1 or 2 seconds. And breathe out. And just really try to think about everything in the world that is centered around love. Everything in the world that is centered around family, everything centered around community, everything centered around the beautiful plant life that we have, and the earth that we have. And if everyone would just close their eyes for a couple of minutes and just think about the word love and what it means to you. And take this moment of silence and be selfish with it. And just remember to breathe while you think about love. When you're ready, you can open your eyes slowly, but still thinking about love. And what we want to bring into this space. And what we want to bring into this space, we want to bring into this space the presence of love for each other, for our family, for ourselves, loving ourselves. So important to love ourselves, and hard to love anyone else if we don't love ourselves. So with that said, I hope everyone is present for our really continuation of conversations that we've had previously. And the week before last, our last session, we had a very good, robust conversation. We do want to make sure that we are cognizant that we need to, with this size of group, use the raise hand feature. Make sure that everyone is both has a chance to express themselves and is being heard. It's very, very important that we listen and at 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 all costs, not speak over each other and raise our hand and listen to each other, as in we all have something to learn. And the only way to really get to a sense of empathy is to hear each other and listen to each other and express how your thoughts. And again, I'll re-emphasize that this is a safe space. There is no defensiveness needed. There's no reason to feel insecure. There's no reason to feel that you'll be harmed or thought any ill, because we have love in this presence. And it's very, very important because there's so much in the world right now that really is in the need of having a safe space. There's not enough safe spaces. There's not enough safe spaces. And people are running and don't have anywhere where they can be with other people and feel safe. So we want to make sure that we start here, that this space is safe. Everybody agree? Okay. I'd like to start with a personal story. Everyone knows I'm a chef, and I've been cooking since I was 14. I started in a business as a dishwasher. Then I became a cook. I started when I was again 14 years old, and I did so many different jobs focused on really falling in love with cooking and food, but it was an ends to a means. It was somewhere that you could work at a very young age, and you could get a paycheck. Back in those days, it was sometimes cash, which is even better. But what led me to my social justice work is the fact that um, I worked very, very hard to save money and go to one of the best culinary schools there were, Culinary Institute of America in Poughkeepsie. And even as a young 20-something-year-old, I realized that all that hard work and saving and um, you know, no one was paying for the school. Like I couldn't afford to fail a class, so I was forced to excel in every class. If you failed the class, it was something like $3,000. That was not an option for me. But I also realized that it was my first taste of really seeing, although it was the best education, it was the most toxic environment for someone of color, especially a student of color, because the construct of it was not inclusive for anyone of color. And at that very moment, I knew that I needed to be a voice for the voiceless. I needed to step in, and even as a student, thank God I had good grades because they would have kicked me out. But as a student, I needed to challenge the school that this was not right. And the excuses I got about not wanting to form a student club for the students of color because it was not something done, or they didn't, that was an unexcusable, unacceptable excuse. And I fought tooth and nail because I saw the demoralization and trauma that was created in that environment for people that looked like me. And that was my really first taste of recognizing that these powerful institutions create these constructs of oppression that are woven into whatever system. In this case, it was an educational system in the culinary arts, one of the most powerful in the world. And I began to realize that this was one part, this system was one part of a larger system that was just looped into different rings of societal oppression. And how that translates is access. In the case of my work, um, having access to education, training, and community access to food and nutritional education. And really understanding that this cycle started a very long time ago. And as a result of it, generationally, it repeats itself. And if we've learned anything over recent events, is what I've learned. My biggest takeaway is that the circumstances will remain the same unless there's a convergence of creating the conditions to change the circumstances. And if that convergence happens, and we've seen it happen, or we've seen a taste of or a glimmer of it happening, it can lead to a prerequisite for this social justice, this racial equity. But first has to be this prerequisite of accountability. But there needs to be this convergence. That's why I love looking at all these faces, because I see the possibility of us converging to create conditions to actually change the system and change the circumstances so that they don't have to repeat over and over again. So I want to just show you a slide that kind of reflects a small little tidbit of where this race and social justice fits into, especially the work around mindful eating for the beloved community. So can you put that up, Bob? Yes. So here, we talk about healthy community, but the overarching um, umbrella is social determinants of health. Because without having, again, these conditions, we really can't have a healthy community. I mean, people talk about going to get food. Well, if you've got a family, 3 kids at home, and you've got to ride the bus an hour to go get food, people don't really recognize, the constraints and the barriers that are really created by that, and the inaccessibility that also is created by that. Social justice and this whole equation around racial equity fits right in there. In fact, the CDC over the last 2 weeks has designated that racism is a health outcome, and and have listed it as one of the key health equity disparities that exist. We have transportation, access to care. Again, being able to go get the medicine and the testing and a lot of people in our community um, don't even have the necessary access to getting, care and health care. Then there's always housing, which is an environmental thing. Community safety. Um, that's another element that is also can be very traumatizing. Living in an area where you have to worry about if your kids are gonna make it home from school, stray bullets. Economic opportunity, education, of course. The environmental quality. We've learned that in different parts of the country. If you want to look at the water circumstance in Michigan, Flint, Michigan, and there's many other examples. Again, it took a convergence of individuals to create the conditions to change those circumstances, because they had bad water for a very, very long time. And then, affordable food, being accessible to a park, um, very, very important that you're able to actually, take a walk in the park. That's something that you can actually pull the plug and actually wind down and take a deep breath in nature and take that break. Um, and then obviously the social and cultural cohesion. I mean, that's the silver bullet of what really glues everything together. So, when people think about health, um, they often think about the absence of disease. And in actuality, that just means that you're not sick. That doesn't mean that you're healthy. And so when you talk about being resilient and being able to have higher productivity and higher energy levels and not be dragged down and like you wake up every day because of just how society and all the different elements can just make you so tired. You're taking you have to take multiple naps during the day just to make it through the day because you're worn out. And it's so hard to build a community unless we have um, individuals that can, with resilience and be healthy to actually contribute to being part of that building overarching framework. So the next slide. So how does mindful eating for the beloved community fit in? And so this is a wheel. They call it a wheel, but I could almost say that this is kind of like, if I change things around, this could be a systems map. But if you look at how everything can be connected, and you look at how the food space is, you have community based, or if you go right to left. If you have community-based organizations like what we're doing now with Interfaith Public Health Network, looking at incorporating Not 62, looking at working with Father David St. Helena's, all of these partnerships, collaborations. This is what we want to do to build, that capacity building to, again, create conditions to change the circumstances. And then we want to look at key issues in each of these domains that, quite frankly, I didn't even know about until a couple of years ago. I had no idea that there was food insecurity on such a high level in colleges and universities, until I started really doing an investigation on food insecurity to find out that a lot of students actually go out and steal food because they can't afford food and they don't have any food in their pantries. And I find that highly problematic, for someone trying to better their life and then could get arrested for something like stealing. So there is a concern in that component, especially since a lot of these colleges and universities are being ran by multi-million dollar food service management companies. So there's an injustice. And then you have, the food service workers, and the whole environment within healthcare. Healthcare is, I mean, some of these healthcare systems have, 4 hospitals, 9 hospitals. They're large Goliath, depending on the bed capacity, and they're serving a community. And based on the administration and the leaders, really impacts how that community is not only served, but the workers, all the workers. These departments are huge with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. How they're impacted, and if they don't feel good about working there, you know who the end user is that is really not at risk. It's the patients, and so there's an injustice area. Then you have all the hotels that are going through a paradigm shift, trying to figure out how they reimagine themselves as post COVID. But again, all tourism and hotel partnerships are symbiotic, because when people travel, they stay in hotels. So you have there a space where a lot of people are engaged as workers, as people in the service industry, we'll call it, and yet the career opportunities are not so advanceable. There's definitely a lot of layers of injustice there. And then moving more to the left, we have a lot of opportunities to really create frameworks of like what we're doing here. How do we understand building collectives? Building a collective is where you get a opportunity to form those conditions for everyone to converge, and you're able to foster growing, learning, healing, and the leadership necessary in community. And then, all of this, once it all starts to come together, we deal with another two areas that are extremely problematic, and that is the corporate food service that runs stadiums, corrections, K through 12, conference centers, but yet not being held accountable in terms of corporate social responsibility, environmental social responsibility, and social impact in the community. So unless we really are able to build upon, and these are like pizza slices, but they could be building blocks, we're not going to be able to really get to the convergence necessary to change, all of the, or really create the conditions to change the circumstances where all of these food related connects are. And it starts with us understanding, from a mindful eating for the beloved community perspective. So I guess we can break out. I mean, when we break out, we can go over any questions, unless there's any blaring questions now, and then I will pass it to Kelly. Right.
I think Bob is gonna go next.
Okay. Sorry. Too many arrows on my paper. Okay.
Yeah, and there was just so much from Alex there that perhaps this could be a good time to have a couple of people ask questions, because again, it was such a rich presentation. Sarah, would you be willing to lead the asking the questions here?
I just want to check to see if there's anyone who has any questions for Alex. Like one of the things that I love what Alex is doing here is he's going from this personal story of, starting kind of at the quote unquote bottom of the chain, and really like he has worked in all these different systems and he's thought about all of these different dynamics at a very kind of personal and professional level. And it's unusual, I think, and unfortunately, I wish it was common. So I just want to give people a chance before Bob talks. Like, does anyone have any questions about either his personal experience or this graphic?
I'll just say something quickly. I appreciate this. Thank you very, very much, Alex. I thought this was very, very helpful. And I think that it's important for us because it's easy for us not to remember all of these, that's all of the things that you have in the circle, and to focus in on maybe just one area. But I think it's incumbent upon us to be very intentional in thinking through in every single one of these areas, because we're all involved. We all intersect with every single one of these areas, whether we know it or not, whether we think it or not. And so it's not a question, but it's just talking out loud, and just reminding myself and others that this is something that we have to be very intentional about in thinking as we go along and as we talk to others, because I've been talking to a lot of people. And in particular, it's interesting because I've been talking to a lot of children, a number of children, not a lot, but a number of children. And just in terms of mindfulness, mindful eating, and I'm talking about young kids starting from 4 years old, 5 years old. And so this helps me very, very much to kind of figure out and to move beyond what I've been saying to them into a global way. And children get it, they get it. And of course, involving their parents. And so I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, I could talk about this diagram for an hour, but there's some other really key pieces. The social emotional health and whole employee. I mean, that's the social emotional piece is very important, but also data. What's really important is when you're talking to 3, 4, 5 kids is to ask them a question and kind of write it on the back of a napkin of what, what they say. You know what I mean? And collect as much data, because part of this systemic kind of, injustice is that Black and brown people don't collect their own information and analyze it. We let other people collect it, analyze it, and then tell us what to do with it. And I got to be honest with you, there's something horribly wrong about that process. Where we can ask, be at the family table. Hey, I want to throw out this question and on the back of a napkin, and just, and share it. I asked 5 family members about, this or that or anything related, and start to really build a, in a kind of impromptu or kind of a database of sorts, so that we could share this information. I know that Lois, I don't know if she's on the call, but this is what she's done with her family, and and it's really important because now you can share this information with other family members, and now you have a data-driven approach that helps break past the emotional context of things, which is going to happen anyway. But data is really great. Hard to wrestle with data.
Right. Right.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions, particularly around this particular slide it's still showing?
Hey, this is Toya Moore. The question that I have is, are we going to be able to have access to these 2 slides along with talking points to be able to present, of course, cited data to our own communities that we're bringing this information back to?
Well, I know that from this whole course, we're going to do a very robust and rigorous evaluation of information. This wheel here is really, a theory of action, because and this is a plan of how we can approach from a systems change and an evaluation perspective, the whole food system, of how it, it touches every point of this. To Paula's point, whether we know it or not, we are connected to each one of these, these pizza slices and different portions of that. In terms of breaking out the wheel, and I think I have some documentation, but it's what we wanted to do is create a diagram that kind of was self-explanatory, if that makes sense, where the only directions is to go from right to left, looking at community-based organizations, and then really looking at each slice and how you build upon each slice. And that's why there's so many words in this diagram. If you have like a particular part of this diagram that you'd want me to break out, please let me know and I'll do that for you.
And
Alex,
will
can we see
people
the
have,
first slide again?
will people have access to it, Alex? Will you send out the slides to them, or can we?
Bob, we're gonna put this in the library.
Yeah, we certainly can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. But what were you saying, Paula?
No, I was just wondering if we can look at the first slide again.
Sure.
Because I think in these areas also, this is where we can, if even each of us picks one to become involved in, just even one area, it will make a difference.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions before we move on? You will have access to this. I think we're gonna come back to these slides again, continue to engage with them more deeply.
And if there's any questions, I mean, everyone has the email, so we can also answer questions between sessions as well. If something pops up or you get that popcorn effect, pop, 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 that's fine too.
Can you go back to the second slide again? Let's just take a look at it.
I wanted to.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Again, if there's any specific, slices that, you want to, just email and I can, I can tell you where all the bad actors are, and that's really in the last piece of it, which is the corporate food service piece. But Bob's going to talk a little bit about, the commercial determinants, and this is where most of the bad actors reside. But that's something that we'll be discussing in different pieces, and especially with Kelly, of holding them accountable, right?
You.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're ready to go to Bob now, and we're going.
Right.
We might come back to this slide later on, just to kind of show some connections.
Okay.
Well, thank you for your presentation, Alex, and for this great discussion. And I'm just going to do a brief presentation looking at really something that's just going to add to what Alex said, and that's to look at a barrier to systems thinking, and that is a excessive focus on the individual versus a community. And a lot of times our language, particularly in the United States and in other so-called Western nations, can be problematic in that way. So if we look at language like personal responsibility, initiative, self-actualization, freedom, all very good things in their place. But if we're using those words excessively, as opposed to community-focused words, things like mutual responsibility, collective action, the common good, and our obligation for one another, we tend to fall into problems. We get out of the system thinking and wind up in kind of thinking traps. And, another thing I'll mention here is, of course, personal responsibility is very key to a lot of our faith traditions. We don't want to take that away. The question is, when we focus on that solely and we deny community language, we get into trouble. And that can sound pretty philosophical. So let's look at a kind of a specific instance as it connects to mindful eating. And that's the concept of the family dinner. And we know the family dinners are good for kids and families. The research is overwhelming that kids that eat for family dinner, and I believe that's one of the key pieces in the entire mindful eating program, doing that as much as we can, eating socially, talking to each other. It's good for kids' development. 20 years of research has shown that kids that have family dinners are less likely to have problems with alcohol and other drugs. They'll be healthier in many ways. They'll have better self-esteem. They're less likely to be depressed. They're less likely to attempt suicide, across a wide range of issues. But then the question becomes, well, how do we encourage family dinners? How do we get more people, prioritizing their family dinner time? And here are two individual ways of looking at it. One is to say good parents, decent parents take the personal responsibility and they prioritize the family dinner time. So that's kind of a moral individual frame. And then another way to look at it is to make it an educational issue. People need to be educated as to why they work, and we have to give them kind of ideas and tools to make it work. But again, focused on kind of the individual level. And so we've had a lot of programs over the years where we've done just what those two things have said. We've kind of encouraged. Sometimes when it's negative, it's finger wagging. Sometimes when it's positive, it's like, here are all these ideas that you can do, so that your families will have dinner together. But Alex talked about the social determinants of health. And I think a great example is chapter 9 that we read in the mindful eating book, the Buen Provecho chapter. And excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. By Victor Ruiz, who talked about, kind of these wonderful sobremesas that he dealt with his family, where people would have family dinner and they would linger and have these wonderful deep discussions, and how his family got out of that and he missed it and he saw the problems from it. And if you read that chapter, you see the social determinants are woven through a lot of his language. So his mother having to work multiple jobs. Well, what determines that socially? An economic system that requires people of color especially to work long hours just to make ends meet. So they don't have time for family dinner. Cheap, readily available, and aggressively marketed junk foods, which are part of those commercial determinants of health that Alex had mentioned as well. And then, a deeper problem, Ruiz talks about disowning beans as something he would eat because he was made fun of it by classmates. And here you get this internalized racism and stigma that's made worse by this kind of corporate culture, which can be very homogenous and undercut, our wonderful cultural traditions. So as we look at these issues in the weeks ahead, and we're going to get deeper into a lot of these areas, we want to ask ourselves these questions. And Kelly's going to reach a couple of these too when she talks about food systems in a minute. How do our economic and policy systems and history shape our food systems? Also touched on by Sarah's presentation on the history of sugar a couple of weeks ago. What's the role of these supersized corporations in determining what and how much we eat? How do they affect our freedom? If we're really looking at freedom, it's not just to be able to eat and buy whatever we want, but a lot of our decisions are guided for us by these powerful corporations. How does systemic racism affect our food practices and their health effects? And then on the positive side, how can our faith communities help create positive and lasting change to work toward this beloved community that, we're all here together to work for? And just a couple of quick quotes, basically saying the same thing from different perspectives. Thelma Jean Goodrich: we need to stop trying to fix up people so that the system works better and start fixing up the system so that people work better. And then Walter Wink, a theologian, coming at it from the faith angle: we can work for a society which will not make people good, but in which it will be easier for them to be good. So making the healthy choice the easy choice. And with that, I'll pass it on to Kelly to talk about food systems.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and thanks, Alex, as well for your overview. I'm glad to be able to have you frame this conversation getting into the food system. And as Alex talked about earlier, and Bob, we have to definitely make sure that we're using a racial equity frame into any of this work that we're talking about. But I just wanted to show you like a simple diagram of the food system so we can talk about all of the different areas where we can make an impact, because there's so many different there's 6 components to this cycle right here, but there's so many different ways that that could be impacted. So if we start with production, right, when we have you have the food that's growing in the farms, but we can think about what's the role of people within these systems. So we have the farm workers producing our food, but and I'm gonna ask a lot of hypothetical questions here for us to think about, but is there adequate support for small farmers and farmers of color in producing our food, or do we have a lot of government subsidies that disproportionately benefit large multinational corporations that are using industrial processes instead of agroecological processes, right? So we have a lot of these multinational corporations, and they're also diminishing the environmental sustainability as well as the nutrition of the food in the way that they're growing it, and they're adding toxins to the environment. We can also think about the food workers, and are they protected? Do they have good pay and benefits? And do companies support ownership of by the employees, such as through worker-owned cooperative model? Or do most of the company's profits go to the top leadership? And then how are we supporting people in learning about how to grow food and agricultural education and training and entrepreneurship opportunities? And what programs are out there that support new farmers? And what ways is urban farming encouraged and supported, or what barriers to urban farmers face? So, there's a lot of policy we can get into, in future weeks of this conversation in terms of, ways to address this at the city, state, national level in terms of in food policy. But there's just a lot of things to think about in terms of each element of the food system. So the next one is processing, like how is our food processed? And, I say this a lot of times, I say processed food, it's not good to have a lot of processed food, and people say, oh, well, what about like, canned beans? Like, isn't that still good? It's still processed. Yes, but that's minimally processed, compared to what there's this new term called ultra processed. And actually 60% of our food system in the US is ultra processed. And I was shocked when I heard that statistic. We're not just processing food for, so that we can preserve, it for a couple of days in the fridge, or so that it's cut, so that it's easier, when we're making dinner. But really, most of the food is ultra processed, and that means that we're having foods that have so many ingredients on the label, we can't even pronounce them. So that there's a different level of processing there we have to consider. Then we get into distribution. So is the food getting distributed locally and regionally? And are we consuming food that was produced nearby, or is it distributed long distances across the country and even internationally? And most of the food that comes through Hunts Point in the Bronx is really coming from different parts of the world. So that's definitely something to think about. Longer distances, not only do they increase the carbon footprint, and it's not as fresh as it is distributed a short distance, it also increases the number of middlemen involved in getting our food to us. And is the food distributed in vehicles that contribute to environmental pollution or in environmentally friendly ways? We have so many trucks coming through the South Bronx, and they are contributing to a lot of pollution, which contributes to asthma. So we have to think about these things and how is our food getting to us? And is the food hub infrastructure in place that would allow for a group like the Bodega Association to be able to purchase fresh foods in bulk and be able to distribute it to individual stores for them to sell at more affordable prices? That's something I've thought a lot about. How can we make it easier for bodegas to sell healthy food at affordable prices? If they were able to store their food and be able to, purchase it at bulk prices and provide that discount to the consumers. So things to think about in terms of distribution. Then when it comes to access, we can think about, are there adequate farmers markets or grocery stores in a community? Is that food affordable? Or do we have a food swamp, which is filled with food that is unhealthy and ultra processed? If food is provided to community members via food pantries, is that food fresh and healthy? And what kind of programs do we have that are making healthy food more affordable, like SNAP and WIC and Health Bucks? And how does the community know about these programs and access and utilize them? There's a lot of concerns with immigrants and fear of using government programs, which means that they're not able to access these food and these opportunities. Also, what kind of food is accessible in schools, hospitals, faith-based organizations, senior centers, and prisons? That gets into what Alex was speaking about before in terms of all of the different places where we could impact the way that food is produced and served. And do procurement laws incentivize these places to purchase healthy foods produced in ways that honor local economies, valued workforce, nutrition, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability, or foods that they can get at the lower cost? Most of the time we see these bidding contracts go towards the lower cost, and we have to get them to instead incentivize procurement of foods that do meet these values, which actually there's a program that does that called Good Food Purchasing Program, by the way. Then we move into consumption, and we may notice here that there's not a stage involving cooking, so I'm just going to include that here as well. And so are people informed of the nutritional quality of food enough to make informed choices? Or are we, subject to the unfair marketing of advertisements for unhealthy foods and beverages that are actually disproportionately impact communities of color and children? Do people know how to prepare foods that they do have access to? Do they have enough time to prepare meals, or are they busy working multiple jobs? So those are different things. Also, what do we do with the leftovers of our food? And do large institutions rescue food, or do they have policies against rescuing food because they're afraid of the safety? So there's these different things to think about. A lot of food gets wasted. 1/3 of food actually gets wasted, if you remember from the video that we had in the assignment. And then waste recovery, that includes composting. Do government programs make composting services available and accessible. And then there's also the factor of, throwing out food because we think that it's bad because of the expiration date. And actually, there's a need for more national research informed standards for expiration dates, so that good quality food is not wasted. So there's a lot to think about. The food system looks simple here, but if we really dig into it, there's a lot that can be changed and a lot to consider that would make our food system more sustainable, healthy, and equitable. So with that, I think we're going to move into breakout groups. Anyone wants to jump in?
Oh, question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for the wonderful presentation. Yeah, I have a question in regards to food insecurity. How does it affect the following elements such as homelessness, violence, elderly population, depression, unemployment, and education? And if somebody can elaborate on each of those elements, I'll be so grateful. Thank you.
That was a lot. I'm trying to capture all of these different pieces that you said. I mean, I think in terms of, I think that goes into access, right? I talked about the affordability, like, we do have food pantries, right? And soup kitchens, but how are people able to access them? And I think the more barriers that there are to people accessing food, it makes it more difficult for them to make healthy choices. So Reverend Felicia, I think that was you, right? That asked that question.
Yeah, correct.
If you, I didn't catch all the different words that you said, but if you did list them out, we can look into those in more detail. I don't know if we want to spend time to go over that now or do the breakouts, but I'm happy to follow up with you on that further as well.
Yeah, if you want to send that in the chat, specifically, Pastor Felicia, we can look up those specific elements for you.
Thank you.
And I know part of the work with Mindful Eating for the Beloved Community, as we continue to build, build on the work over the years, is really looking at how we could be instrumental in solutions to deliver nutrition to the homeless population. And so that's kind of on the drawing board. It's still in theory, but we do know through culinary innovation, it's very, very possible. The technology exists. Supermarkets throw out so much vegetables because they're blemished or ugly fruit, and then they pay for it to be hauled off. Makes no sense. We should take that, those vegetables and vegetable proteins, dehydrate them, make them into porridges, put them in a pouch that opens up as a bowl, and have someone, be able to find a cup of hot water. And that's on the back of a napkin. I'm not a rocket science. So, as we build a collective and really get, people that are influencers in policy, I'm sure those types of things can be realized in a very short amount of time.
Right, thank you. So as we were saying, we wanted to give people chances to break into small groups to talk about some of these ideas. We've had, as we're talking about the food system and the healthy communities and the different elements that Alex was bringing up in his second slide. We're going to come back to these. This will not be the first time we're going to be talking about this. We're going to come back to them. We kind of want to just break people into small groups so you have a chance to talk to each other. And the basic questions is, where do you see yourselves and your communities in the food systems? And where are the places within these larger systems that you would like to affect change? That could include what you're already doing, and it could include where you would like to go, both yourself and your communities. So this is a chance to share and learn from one another, to kind of and see, like, maybe when looking at some of those graphics, you saw something that surprised you or you hadn't thought of. But so this is kind of a chance to talk with each other about, where do you see yourselves in these systems, and where would you like to, or where are you already affecting and engage with changing things? And I'll put that question in the chat. And so Bob is going to break people into small groups, about 4 or 5 people in each group. And you're going to do that now, right, Bob?
Yes. Yeah, just give me a minute.
Right. Before we go into small groups, are there any other questions that people might have on the topic, or anything else? We're going to have a good 20 minutes to talk with each other. Okay, great. So you will soon be receiving an invitation. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah, and it should send people there automatically. I just have to do some arranging here.
You know, as just to kind of highlight something that Father David said in the chat earlier on in the conversation, that each of these are elements of, you know, we can look at through the element of our faith, and we can look at through the element of what does it mean to be spiritual beings in this planet at this time, working with structures of oppression and working to change them. And like each of these pieces of these larger systems is something, you know, we might think of them as fallen powers and principalities, as fallen angels. They can be brought into a different alignment with a different way of a different order. So there is a very deep way in which the work that we're doing can connect us more deeply with spirit and can connect us more deeply with one another.
Invitation is coming. So Alex,
Yes.
yeah, I think you're going to have to, it's working differently with the hosts. So Alex, if you could go to room 3.
Okie dokie.
All right.
Okay, we're back.
Mhm.
Oh, I hope your conversation was good like ours.
It was.
It was. I'm sure it was.
Interesting. It was good.
Okay, so who's gonna navigate the feedback? Bob, Kelly?
Well, I'm not sure about right now. I think we want to do a little bit of large group discussion, but yeah, if each of us who was in you know, so Sarah, Bob, Alex, me, and Sylvia, I think hopefully we were each in separate groups and we want to take all the feedback and figure out what we're going to do with it. But yeah, maybe if anyone just wants to share, you know, 1 or 2 things that stood out. I mean, we don't have that much time left, so I don't know, Sarah, what you think about.
Yeah, just if there's any comments that people or thoughts that they want to share with the big group, like a gem that came out that you heard that you want to share with others.
All right.
Larger group hears it.
Just raise your hand. Good, Sandra, you go first. Okay.
I'm much too long-winded, Alex. We don't have time. You just do a synopsis.
No, I won't do no. Someone else can go.
Laura, go ahead.
What?
Laura, you're on mute.
You're muted, Flora.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good now.
No, we were discussing breastfeeding. Why isn't it encouraged more? It's more beneficial for the baby, and it's healthy for the parent. So why don't we have different baby cafes around, or different organizations, or different clinic settings where they encourage the mother to breastfeed her child because it's healthier? That's one of the things that we were talking about. And how can we influence people or clinics or hospitals to do things like this?
And I was mentioning that on page 73 of the My Female Beloved Community book, Chef Breland Lee wrote a chapter just to expecting mothers. I know it's not on the reading list assignment, but for those that wanted to dig right into that subject, we included it in the program, in the book.
I just think it fit in so well with what we were discussing on the chart as to how production of food is controlled by big groups. And they sell billions of dollars worth of baby food. And the stuff that they're selling is not anywhere near what the natural mother has to give her child. So from the very beginning, the nutrition of our food is compromised.
I want to hear from other people.
Joetta, did I see your hand raised?
Okay, yes. One of the things that that came out of the group that I was in was that Lois, we spoke about the social activist. She's a social activist. But what she said is that she is writing a curriculum for her family on how to eat and what to eat with recipes and things. And I thought that that was an excellent idea because that would take in consumerism, passing down recipes throughout the generations, and keeping the family, a way of keeping the family connected. And then we all shared that we talked about consumerism and how we consume, and what especially concerns about keeping food and the healthier, choosing healthier options. So that's what came out, just a little synopsis of what came out of the group that I was in.
Toya, you raising your hand?
Yes, thank you. Hey, the two things that I take away from the group discussion we had, which I think would have gone on longer if we had more time, is one, having a collection of all of the programs that we're aware of that encourage community eating or eating as a family unit. Having that in a consolidated list that you guys are going to put together, I think is fabulous. So I appreciate that. But two, the biggest thing was the idea that some of these bigger corporations, I mentioned Aramark, making food for the colleges in the area, or even the grocery stores. How can I leverage what I'm learning and benefiting from this particular program, and what can you guys do to help with an initiative to get in contact with Aramark or with the school system or the major grocery systems to say, hey, don't throw away those ugly fruit. You know, we'll take them and we'll recycle them back to the communities that need them the most.
Well, my recommendation is that as we move to the final pieces of the program, we really talk about how we could leverage the value of what was learned and communicated during this program into doing maybe some small group projects like that. I mean, I think that would be highly appropriate to move all of this information into a theory of action. Aramark is a very, very large bad actor. I used to work for Aramark. Not a lot of great stories there. But I think, there should be discussion of how best to approach the large institutional constructs that are noted as bad actors. And then, in terms of just really organizing, I think we're going to have a lot of power by the time we get through all these sessions where we can talk about next steps, and I'm all for being engaged and involved in that process.
Alex, Bob was just reminding me of the Heal Food Alliance too, that works with some of those companies. I don't know if they work on food waste though, or just on working with the food chain workers and making sure that these companies are treating them well.
Right. Well, I know Heal kind of works on removing those companies from those accounts. The problem with that is, unless you're able to have a strategy of how to replace the company, it becomes a little problematic to tell someone these are bad actors, you should, be self-operative. But, I think that, again, we will have a lot more power to be a collective and converge and maybe have a conversation with HEAL and, kind of encourage collaboration and leveraging how we can build a collective. I think we're going to need like a military operation, from the air, from the sea, from, all different vantage points, because we're going up against these constructs that are victimizing, our children, definitely on the college and university, our community side. We had a discussion about supermarkets. I mean, it's just, the problem is very, very big. And it's not just one big problem. The problem's connected to another larger problem. And so this is why these collective, training towards movement and action are very, very important, so that we all are on the same page and we can articulate when we start getting to, the people that control policy and sit them down. And it's not just one person, but it's, it's 20 people from this class session, from all different faiths that can sit down and from all different perspectives and say, this is a problem. How do you expect to solve it? And unless we put that type of, I think, collective pressure, I don't think the conditions will be created to change the circumstances.
Lanice, your hand was up.
Yes, I was just going to say that my group, we talked about the differences in the quality of food that certain neighborhoods get versus other neighborhoods. Like people in the South Bronx, they don't get the same quality of food as people in the North Bronx, and how the prices are higher in those communities. And we were just trying to brainstorm on what could possibly be done about that. We certainly know that it's probably more or less political that it's happening, but it's an inequality that needs to stop.
Very true. Thanks, Liz.
Absolutely. We're kind of coming, and that's actually sounds like a really good note to bring our conversation to a close for today. We'll be coming back in 2 weeks. We're going to be inviting you to kind of look more into where your food is coming from as part of this next homework assignment. Are there any kind of just closing, I'm wondering if anyone would like to do a closing prayer.
Okay.
Can you close us out?
You like me to pray out?
Pray out? Is that how they say it? Yeah, pray out.
All right. Lord God, we are just so thankful that you brought us all together tonight. We came with our visions, our ideas, energetic and ready to work, but only you would know the ending, because only you would be able to know that. But we will take what we've learned and we are going to continue to use it. That is what we do when we are fighting for justice. We are consistent about it and we fight for it. And we thank you for energizing us and giving us the desire to want to do it. And so as we leave this place, just keep us safe and let us continue to work. Amen, amen, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Amen.
Kelly, you want to see Kelly? Hi, Kelly. Kelly.
Hi.
Kelly, can you see
Helena.
Good
Is it
night.
Helena?
A little bit.
Asha's grandma. You remember me, of course. I'm gonna get your number, call you.
Wow, that was a long time ago we met.
Yes. Long time haven't seen you.
Yeah.
I'm getting your number. You know, Asha has a baby.
Wow.
Okay.
10 months.
Congratulations.
So everybody have a good night.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
I'm gonna call you.
We'll be in touch.